Welcome to episode 3 of the Deep Cover Podcast. Your host, Omar Zaran here, and just kind of want to talk this week about NFL free agency. In the past, it seems like, the NBA free agency was kind of the dominant off-season event in pro sports. And also like baseball's hot stove, where big contracts are laid out. And the NFL kind of, I think, a little bit flew under the radar, especially since you didn't have free agency until the early 90s. And that's not the case anymore. The NFL free agency is an event. Guys like Adam Schefter and Ian Rappaport are always sending stuff out, updates, and this year, especially, we see a lot of movement. We see a lot of running backs go to new places. Josh Jacobs going from the Raiders to the Packers. Saquon Barkley from the Giants to the Eagles. And Austin Eckler to the Washington Commanders. A lot of different players moving around. We've seen wide receivers move around. The Tennessee Titans signed Calvin Ridley in addition to running back Tony Pollard from Dallas. And a lot of these guys are moving around. But as I'm looking at it, it kind of is reminding me of something. That in the NFL today, there's really only 3 positions that are high focus for teams and something that they kind of want to lock in on for free agency and long-term team building. And that is, one, the quarterback, which is, the center of your offense, the center of your team, the leader of your team, the person who's touching the ball the most on offense. Then you want your offensive tackles, left and right, to be able to protect that quarterback from getting hit all the time. And then you're also focusing on your edge rusher, the guy on your defense, to trying to get the opposing QB. And we saw this with the Giants, right? They let Saquon Barkley walk to the Philadelphia Eagles. They let Xavier McKinney, a safety, walk to the Green Bay Packers. And what they did is they took the draft capital that they got from Seattle for acquiring Leonard Williams and used that to get Brian Burns, an elite edge rusher, still in his prime, from the Carolina Panthers, a guy who wanted out of Carolina for the last year or two. And he is paired now with Kayvon Thibodeau, another young, promising defensive end, and they are going to try and rebuild that line from the outside in, because they already have Dexter Lawrence there. So now they got the 2 edge rushers, and they decided to forego the running back, forego the safety, and get the edge rusher. And that just goes to show you how important this all is, right? You need to have an edge rusher, an offensive lineman, tackle, and a great quarterback. Every other position kind of feels secondary, right? It reminds me of what the Patriots used to do during the Belichick and Brady era, right? Where they have the quarterback, of course. They had their good offensive linemen. They used to have like Richard Seymour on the line. But their running backs, their wide receivers, these guys are all interchangeable, right? One year you'd have Lawrence Maroney. And next year you'd have Ben Jarvis, Green Ellis. The following year you'd have Kevin Falk. It was kind of a spiraling circular door of guys coming in and out. Same thing with wide receiver. You had Troy Brown, you had Danny Amendola, Wes Welker. All these guys kind of come in and out, are productive, and they're just puzzle pieces that you could easily replace. The quarterback, of course, is not easily replaceable, and we all know that. But you do have to wonder if there's a little bit of a devaluing of other positions in today's NFL, to the point where you think, I just have the QB, I don't need a good receiver. I don't need a safety. I have the pass rusher. I don't need good corners, right? And you've seen that in the cornerback market. Not a lot of great corners in the NFL anymore because we're so reliant on the line and the pass rush. And with the offensive side, running backs kind of come a dime a dozen. Teams have decided to just get a new guy in the draft, reset the contract over and over and over again, right? With the Giants and Cowboys, with Ezekiel Elliott a couple years ago, you saw that, right? Where they pay him for a little bit, franchise tag usually, and then eventually get rid of him. The Cowboys did extend Zeke, but decided real quick that was a mistake, right? And so if you're a player in these positions, you're probably thinking, how do I make myself valuable? And the way you do that at receiver, at running back, and at safety is versatility. You need to be able, as a safety, for example, to cover the pass in the deep cover zones, and also be able to come into the box and stop the running game and the short passing game. As a running back, you have to be able to catch the ball out of the backfield and in the slot. We saw that this year in Detroit with Jahmyr Gibbs. We've seen it in San Francisco with Christian McCaffrey. That's the new mold to make a running back more valuable. And receivers, you have to be able to do something in the short spacing game, like jet sweeps, bubble screens, in the intermediate routes, like quick slants and quick outs, and then the deep go routes as well. So you have to have all three phases of the route tree kind of really locked in, right? But it just continues to be that teams are going to continue to prioritize a quarterback, a tackle, and an edge rusher above all else. Those are kind of like your high value, high price things. And that's what kind of used to be like that with running backs, right? They used to be the most important position. But it seems like we are going more and more and more emphasis into what a QB can or can't do. And you start to wonder, is that good for the game, right? Is that something that we should be looking at as a positive? You know, the quarterback is always going to be your team's focal point. And a lot of the highlights now on defense come from the edge rusher. So you got a little bit of a chess match between the offensive lineman and the edge rusher. But, you know, the swim moves, the different type of spin moves that they could do to be able to kind of get to the QB are fascinating and something that's really captivated people's attention. Much more than, say, an interception or an open space tackle on the edge that like Patrick Willis and Ray Lewis used to do. So you really have come to this point now where it's like the haves and the have-nots, and these three positions are the haves and everybody else is the have-nots, trying to extrapolate some sort of value. I think they'll continue to go into versatility to try to prove each person's individual value. But you do kind of wonder, can a wide receiver ever be the face of the league? Can a running back ever be the face of the league? Probably not. It's always going to be a QB or it's going to be an edge rusher, right? Like you look at a team like the Chargers. The players that matter the most to them, quarterback Justin Herbert, edge rushers Joey Bosa, and Khalil Mack, right? They let Austin Eckler go. They let Keenan Allen go. You know, they're high-producing skill position players, and they are convinced that we're just going to replace this in the draft. And a lot of teams have shown that this is the case, but you do wonder if we're going to kind of just make that assumption and not bring in guys that really matter. And I think the Chiefs, they've kind of thrown us all for a loop, similar to what the Patriots did, because their quarterback is so good. The problem is, Patrick Mahomes type players, they don't grow on trees. He's a once-in-a-generation type player. So if you're another team and they're saying, well, I got the QB, I don't need to pay for this receiver, right? You think Miami might do that with Tua Tagovailoa. They think, oh, we got our QB, I don't need to pay for Tyreek Hill anymore. When the reality is, Tyreek Hill is their offense. So it's going to be a curious type of thing to see how that develops. Joining me this week in the interview section of the pod, we have Aaron Ball. Aaron is a good friend of mine from the Off the Ball Network, also co-host of the Tacos and Touchdowns podcast, which is about the Dallas Cowboys, a team that he is a fan of. And we talk a little bit at length about all of this, you know, the positional importance and why it's so important. And the key thing you want to kind of take away that Aaron mentions is there is a balance that you need to have. You know, the Cowboys, for example, did nothing in free agency. They let a lot of players go. Michael Gallup, Tony Pollard, Tyron Smith. And they haven't really replaced those guys because they feel like they have the QB and they have the edge rusher and Micah Parsons, and they could figure everything else out through the draft. So Aaron kind of talks about needing a little bit of a balance there to have veteran leadership in addition to young and up-and-coming players. And it's a really fascinating point and conversation about just how team building really happens in the NFL. You know, how maybe the draft is more of a crapshoot than we make it out to be. A lot of good players come from later rounds. A lot of busts happen early, you know, and you're just kind of hoping for the best, right? And maybe that some teams are starting to overvalue those quarterbacks just a little bit. So right after the break, we have Aaron Ball, Off the Ball Network, Tacos and Touchdowns. Make sure to check him out, of course, and we will see you back in a second. All right, joining me now on the Deep Cover podcast is a guy I love working with. We have done a couple of episodes on his podcast a couple of times in the past, and it's high praise when a Giants fan is saying that about a Cowboys fan. But joining me on the Deep Cover podcast this week is Aaron Ball from the Tacos and Touchdowns podcast and from Off the Ball Network. Aaron, thanks for taking the time.
Hey, I appreciate you, Omar, for having me on my show. I wish I had my computer was working. I'm doing it on my phone, so I apologize to everybody out there and everything on the show. But I appreciate you, bro. We do a show every Thursday and stuff, and we definitely appreciate you being on our show, and I'm honored to be on yours.
Awesome. Thank you, Aaron. And yeah, if you don't know, Aaron is located in Texas, and so they got some thunderstorm situation going on there, which is kind of a weird thing for me, who's somebody who's lived in the Midwest and the Pacific Northwest now, where we're kind of a little bit better equipped to handle weather, and but once you get into the South, it just gets real difficult, especially with thunderstorms, if there's ice or something like that. So hope everybody down there is staying safe, but. Just kind of want to talk a little bit today about free agency, right? And so this week, NFL free agency hit. Everybody who has the notifications from Schefter and Ian Rappaport had their phones going off crazy, right? This person signed here, there, wherever. But it's kind of become clear to me anyway, Aaron, I don't know if you feel the same way, that the most important positions now that teams have dictated is three guys. So your quarterback, obviously, the guy who's throwing the ball and touching it the most, your offensive tackles who are protecting that quarterback, and your edge rusher who is trying to sack that quarterback, right? So it seems like everything is centered around the quarterback, right? And so do you think like all these other positions that we've seen on the move, a lot of safeties moving around, a lot of running backs, of course, a lot of wide receivers, do you think that other positions have been kind of devalued in the NFL, in today's NFL?
Yeah, they've definitely been devalued, but they're still a valuable position. But like you said, quarterback is that high value position because you want to have that quarterback that has a high IQ that can break down the offense and the defense and stuff because you got to make those quick adjustments. And one thing you got to have that pinpoint accuracy, like making that throw to your receiver, your tight end, or even your running back, and it could just be this small window. If you can do that, that's saying a lot for your quarterback. Not every quarterback to make that because, like you said, you see a lot of quarterbacks that are that are still in that first round. Everybody's trying to find that franchise quarterback. Not every team has one, and you see there's a lot of players go through quarterback rotation every 2 years, maybe even a year or so, and then sometimes you got to have that quarterback that could just be that game manager for that 1 year until you can find that quarterback. But when it comes to you got to have a good. I think one other undervalued position is like your centers or your defensive tackles. You got to have those that having a good defense, two good defensive tackles, your nose, and then your three tech helps out your edge rushers so they could do one-on-one instead of them taking on the double teams. If you have that good like a Chris Jones or type of player like that can generate pressure, that could take double teams and just be just a efficient defensive tackle, you're doing a really good job because not every team has those. And your center, that's your leader of your offensive line. He's the one like if your offensive tackles and your guards are not on sync, your center is that quarterback of the offensive line. I think that should be another value position. And this is coming from a former offensive line, so I know you were talking about wide receivers and so I think there's like so much of a dime a dozen when it comes to receivers. There's a lot of talented ones, and there's some that just are missing something. But if they could find a receiver in the draft or a free agent that has like that good route running, or it's not just about who's the fastest. If you can make that precision route in the right timing with the quarterback, you're doing a really good job. And then running backs is they just have a short shelf life, and that's the biggest thing. Like they may have good 3 to 4 years, but sometimes their production dwindles, and I think you just got to. That's why you have that running back by committee is probably sometimes the best route.
You mentioned the defensive tackle being so important, especially like as a guy who watches the Giants, like Dexter Lawrence is that for us, right? He clogs up the middle, allows Thibodeau and soon to be Brian Burns kind of do some things on the edge. I kind of look at it like in the 90s where you had a lot of I formation, where you had
Mhm.
like, you need a really good fullback for a running back, right? And
Mhm.
to kind of open up those lanes. And it's kind of a similar dynamic where they are so important, but you don't really think about it. Like the guy I loved watching back in the day was Work Done when he was with the Buccaneers, right? And he had Mike Allstott in front of him as at fullback. And I always thought his success, as a runner was so predicated by what Allstott was able to do by opening up the gaps there in the middle of the offensive line. I do want to kind of jump back into the backs and the receivers and the safeties that we were kind of talking about just now. And you kind of mentioned about lower shelf life and things of that nature. Now, there's always exceptions to the rule, right? Like
Yeah.
Tyreek Hill is the highest paid receiver in the league right now. He's well sought after, right? People having Tyreek Hill on your team is better than not having Tyreek Hill on your team,
Mhm.
but that's kind of accepted. But in terms of easily replacing them, is it really just going to be just okay? We draft a running back in the second, third, fourth round, like with you guys. Tony Pollard was that case, right? You get a couple
Yeah.
good years out of him, and then free agency comes up. He gets a big money deal from Tennessee, and then you just rinse, recycle, and repeat in the draft. Do you think that that's going to be the case across the board, or could there be like unique cases? Like you could make an argument. Christian McCaffrey is a unique case, right? For the running back position, especially. So, I guess what's your thoughts on just get a guy for 5 years for their rookie deal, and then go ahead and just repeat the cycle with a rookie after that?
Yeah, when it comes to like McCaffrey's a different story because when you were with the Panthers, you thought he was like his career was done, but then you get into a quality uh, offense with the 49ers and they utilize him right. I
Yep.
think it's just they got to be in the right on the right team because some of these players you think that are all they're dwindling and everything, but when you get them in the right that a team knows how to utilize their strengths, I think that's what you got to look at. But there is some cases where you have guys that okay 5 years and now you see their career dwindling, but you have guys that can be maybe the 6 to 8 years. But if you utilize their strengths to the in the right system, I think that's what you could do. But I feel like the best way is just have good a couple of complementary backs. One
Mhm.
that could be that power back, and that guy has that shifty skill, can be a receiver and has good route running tree. And that third one, he's like a jack of all trades, and he can have value on the special teams type of guy. But when it came to the Cowboys with Tony Pollard, in those 2 years, they didn't utilize him right. I think he should be that guy that could utilize the receiving game, and they were trying to have him as that workhorse back, and that's just not how his game was. He wasn't that guy in Memphis that okay, I'm gonna get all the carries. No, you got to have a good rotation with that type of guy. I would like to see what he does for Tennessee because they got him with Tajay Spears and
Mhm.
another guy, so that's gonna be an interesting thing with it when it comes to him.
I do think like a team that did a good job of that last year was the Detroit Lions. They had
Yeah,
Montgomery, that was kind of their bell cow in between the tackles type of back. They had Jameer Gibbs, who did a lot of stuff for them in the receiving game, whether it's out of the backfield or in the slot. And I feel like that's almost what you need to do as a back these days. I think it's the same thing for a receiver. You don't see just a guy who only is a deep threat anymore, or a guy who
no,
only does shallow, right? It's all about versatility, right? You talked about precision route running, being able to kind of get open at all three levels to be able to be utilized in like the jet sweep action game and all
mhm.
that. And I feel like that's what we're seeing. And I just kind of wonder though, like if that becomes a thing, then I kind of hypothesize that we might be looking at a positionless type skill position player eventually, and how do you pay that guy, right? Like a guy who could carry the ball 10 times and catch the ball 10 times a game. Like he's a running back, he's a receiver. What is he, right? And I think eventually we're going to come to a reckoning. I was writing an article about this whole subject this week, and it reminded me so much. The original of this is kind of like the Patriots, right? Because they never
Yeah,
kept a back for too long. They never kept a receiver for too long. Like the biggest joke is always, oh, Tom Brady had like 2 years of Randy Moss, and then he was just throwing the slot receivers the rest of his career in New England, right? And I just wonder if like people, the NFL is a copycat league, if they just saw 20 years of that and they say, well, if we get the guy, and we see it with the Chiefs, right? They're like, bringing in Rashee Rice. They got rid of Tyreek Hill. Didn't miss a beat because they got the guy at QB. And so I guess like my follow up to all that is, do you think we've kind of over indexed on the QB importance? Like, is it, have we just kind of put all of our eggs in this QB basket and now it's kind of like the haves and the have nots? Like my team, our quarterback isn't very good, right? So as a fan, you look into it and you're like, this team is probably going nowhere until they draft his replacement or trade for some other guy or whatever the case may be. I mean, do you think that's kind of problematic in the sport of football?
Yeah, because when you come to quarterback, not everybody having a Patrick Mahomes and
Right.
guys like him. And then, but you're like, well, you got to pay that quarterback regardless of his how he is because he's the quarterback. It's you kind of want to be like, man, if the quarterback is like showing that he's the QB1 for the next 5 to 10 years or more, if you're lucky, yeah, you could do that. But it's just like that quarterback value is like even though he's not the best, you're like, dang, I wish I could upgrade at this. And then when it comes to getting that rookie and then finding it, but not every team finds their quarterback one for the next 5 to 10 years. Some teams have been looking for quarterbacks for almost 20 years and still haven't found that one. It's just the vibe. It's basically they're basically has a contract set on the position instead of like what this quarterback's done and stuff. And then when it comes to the agents, like you still gotta have to pay this guy
Mhm.
40 to 50 million, but he's not a 40 to 50 million dollar quarterback. He's kind of
Right.
more in that 10, maybe in that 10 mil, but you can't pay him that because that's his position. But like if you're doing like with a Patrick Mahomes or Joe Burrow or Lamar Jackson, then we're talking about that. But if you're talking about quarterbacks that are on the fringe of being to be a QB2 in the next 3 years, you're like, I'm not going to pay a quarterback like that. I'm going to look for that next guy. But you gotta have a system. You got to build a system around the quarterback that you have and everything. But I don't think a lot of teams do that. They just throw out a quarterback because he had all these accolades in college. But sometimes all those accolades is the system they had in college, and they don't. Maybe sometimes it doesn't transition to the league.
Yeah, I mean, when you say that, the name that comes to me immediately is Tua in Miami, right? Like,
Yeah.
I remember in college, Alabama, I was like, man, people are going to tank for this guy. He's going to be the next one. And obviously, injuries didn't help, and his lack of mobility at the next level didn't help. But in Miami, he's coming up on a contract extension here, and they're probably going to have to pay him, right?
Mm-hmm.
And going back to the Tyreek Hill point, Tyreek makes $30 million a year. I think he's worth that because he is their offense, right? And you start getting Tua is probably going to be closer to that 40, 50 million number that you talked about. And it feels like an overpay. Daniel Jones with the Giants, overpay. It's like there's a lot of guys. Like you could say Kirk Cousins with Atlanta in this free agency cycle is a little bit of an overpay because, if you're giving them Patrick Mahomes money, you want Patrick Mahomes results, right?
Well,
And
absolutely.
not only one team wins it every year, right? So you're bound to be disappointed. That's just kind of the reality of the situation. But speaking of free agency, obviously there's been a lot of moves. A lot of teams did stuff. I guess who do you think has been approaching free agency the right way this year, and maybe who has dropped the ball, so to speak?
When it comes to the winner, and this is coming from a Cowboys fan, but I got to give a shout out to Houston Texans. They've been
Yeah,
doing great jobs with
they've been great. Yeah.
signing. Yeah, shout out to Tom Parasero and there's that front office when it comes to getting guys. They're not just worrying about getting the big name guys. They're getting guys to fit into that defense with D'Amico Ryans because he's a former NFL player and he was a former linebacker. But they're getting guys and also re-signing guys for C.J. Stroud, and I think they're going to kill it. And when it comes to the draft as well, because they brought in guys like a C.J. Stroud, a Tank Dell, Will Anderson, and now they brought in guys after losing Greenland. They got a Daniil Hunter and some other guys as well. Just and then one underrated one they got was like a Jeffrey Okuda, who's a physical corner
Hmm.
and can be in
Injuries
that depth.
hurt him. Yeah,
Yeah,
but first round pick guy. So yeah.
yeah, and they got him for a good deal. And if he could stay healthy, he could be definitely a solid player to this team. I would have. I would. I'm trying to think of all the other players they had, but they re-signed Noah Brown. If he's healthy, he's a good, solid depth receiver. It's just so they built some more weapons around that team, and then they also got Joe Mixon for a seventh round pick. And that's a steal with that. and you got to deal with injuries with that and some of his little off the field issue. But he's still a good, solid running back. And they still got Damian Pierce, and I'm trying to think if there's any other players they got on that team. Oh, Nico Collins, but I think they're gonna have a good season. But of course, I got to get to the team that didn't really do anything in the in the free agency, and that's my team. They lost a lot of guys, and they just kind of been lackadaisical, like for the past. I can't even think how many years when it comes to free agents. They kind of just bargain bin shop, and I feel like and when they get players, it's always quantity over quality. But there is sometimes they find players that dominate a rough type of guys like a J. Ron Curse and everything. But in this year, they only have Eric Kendricks, who's still a solid linebacker in this league, but he's getting older. But you got needs now at wide receiver, left tackles, and like we're talking about, tackles are a high value position you need to have. And they're linebacker, LVE. You got Michael Gallup was gone, but they got a lot of position they got to fill, and you can't just do it in the draft. You got to find some really quality, good free agents that fit your system and everything. And it's kind of getting close to that draft, and a lot of these high quality guys are basically gone. But there's still some great players out there that they could pick up. But I got to give the main winner to the Houston Texans.
Yeah, and I thought what the Texans did was what you want when you have a young ascending QB. You take advantage of that rookie contract. We saw Jacksonville kind of doing that with Trevor Lawrence, right? Trying to bring in receivers, bring in players. Hasn't worked out for them yet, but with Houston, I mean, you got the coach in place, you got the QB in place. You bring in a better running back to help support him. You're bringing in more talent on both sides of the ball, and for a while it kind of seemed like, well, this is Jacksonville's division to lose, and now it kind of feels like it's Houston's division. And obviously Indianapolis will have something to say about that, and Tennessee is rebuilding, but it really feels like Houston is doing that. And I'm with you on the Cowboys, man. They, especially in the division, other teams have made moves, right? The Eagles acquiring Saquon Barkley and signing a bunch of other guys. The Giants trade for Brian Burns. The Commanders are retooling the whole operation. They're probably going to draft a QB in the first round, and here are the Cowboys not really making a lot of noise. But a team that I think also did well, I think, was Green Bay. I think they made a couple signings. Former Giants safety Xavier McKinney goes there. Josh Jacobs, running back. I think those are good complementary pieces for Justin Love, or Jordan Love, excuse me. And I think the team that really has dropped the ball is the Chargers. To be honest, their whole skill positions are gone, and they're restructuring Bosa and Max deals to presumably free up some money here. And I'm kind of curious how they kind of interact everything with Harbaugh coming in. It should be an interesting dynamic to watch there. It's kind of a weird division too, because obviously the Chiefs have been dominant for so long. Now it looks like Chargers might be taking a step back. Raiders rebuilding. Denver in disarray. It's almost like you're handing the division to the Chiefs on a platter, right? So that's kind of been my read on it. I do want to kind of close out on, you mentioned the Cowboys kind of more focusing on the draft, and honestly, you kind of speaking on them specifically, what a very un-Cowboys-like thing. You're like the glamour franchise in the NFL. I was listening to a show recently, and they had a Fox Media executive on there, and they're like, all right, who are the teams that, you guys want to get on national TV? And he immediately said Dallas, because it's a national fan base, right? That's why they call it. I know people joke about the whole America's team thing, but the reason is because it's a national fan base. You got people on the West Coast, East Coast, South, North, doesn't matter where, you got Cowboys fans, right? But they've kind of made the decision that, hey, we're going to get young, we're just going to get guys in the draft. And do you think that that's smart, or should there be more of a mix of, let's get a veteran here, a veteran there, and go young at like the skill positions? Or do you think what they're doing is kind of the right way, and something we could look at more teams doing in the future?
You got to have a mix. You got to have that blend of veterans and rookies, because you got rookies coming in from college and they got to make that transition into the pros, and the pro level is a lot different than college, and they're gonna make those rookie mistakes. You got to have those veterans that been there in the league that they could lean on and when I'm saying veterans, not guys that are like, okay, they're 30 something years old, but they never like a leader. They just kind of do their own thing. It's like, oh, I guess it's your job. I'm not gonna help you out. I'm trying to get a job. But if you got guys like, I'm gonna compete, but I'm gonna help you out because my you have more years ahead of me than I do. But I want to be that guy that can help you out and everything. That's when the veterans you want on that team. And like I said, you got to have quality veterans on this team. You can't just have rookie, just hopeful on the draft because some teams are fail at when it comes to drafting, but they do well in free agency. But if you can find that good middle ground where okay, we can hit on at least 3 out of the 7 guys we have in the draft. And when it comes to free agency, we get 80% or 85% of the free agencies. They may not be superstars, but they're quality role players or veteran starters. Yeah, you got to have like if you reach that middle ground, that's the franchise that's doing a really good job. You ain't got to have the big name type of free agents, but if you can find guys that are kind of middle of the road, but they can be a good quality at the position they play, then I'd say that's the definition of success when it comes to offseason.
I do want to, before I let you go, kind of want to get your thoughts here on the draft coming up. First of all, like with your team, who do you think they should be targeting in the early rounds? And obviously, the second part of that is the big intrigue is the top 3 picks with Chicago, Washington, and New England. Everybody's assuming 3 QBs. I guess what order do you think those guys will go in?
Uh, when it comes to the first 3 teams.
Yeah.
I feel like the Chicago they're gonna most likely go with Caleb Williams, and I feel like the Commanders may go with a Jaden Daniels, and I
Hmm.
just feel when it comes to the Patriots, it's gonna be Drake May, unless yeah, it's gonna be Drake May unless something crazy happens in a trade or something like that. But I feel like a lot of people saying I think the first 3 picks are gonna be quarterback. And when it comes to my team, we got to look at an offense, left tackle, and wide receiver, linebackers, another one. I feel like you can get a running back in day 3, but
Yeah.
if you got but you could pick up a running back in free agency and have that good 1-2 punch again. I think that's how you succeed when it comes to that. But you got to get that offensive lineman. We do have a good center in Brock Hoffman, but you can maybe get one of those day 2, day 3 guy centers that can maybe compete with him. But if there's a Zach Frazier or a Jackson Power Johnson that's there at 24, I'll go for him. But if there's that, when it comes to tackle, and it will be a Josh Morgan, a Tyler Guyton. And I like a Marius Mims, but he's kind of more of a developmental guy, hasn't played a whole lot. But when it comes to, I like a Guyton or a Morgan when it comes to the Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah, as for the Giants' perspective, I always kind of I'm looking at the 6th pick, and there's a lot of ways they could go with it. The guy I circled immediately was Joe Alt from Notre Dame, the
That's a good
tackle.
one.
Yeah, and I think they should go offensive line personally, especially if they're going to give Daniel Jones another year. A lot of people are suggesting Romo Dunze or Malik Neighbors, the receivers. And some people are even saying go QB and reach for somebody like JJ McCarthy, which I am firmly against. But that's just me. That's my team, and I just got to deal with their mediocrity, I guess. But Aaron, man, I appreciate you coming on. Obviously, I know you do a lot of work. Just anything you want to plug, let the people know where they can check you out.
Yeah, appreciate you, Omar, for having me on the show. You can definitely check us out. We're newly on YouTube, but we've been mainly on Twitter. I still call it Twitter. You can follow us at Tacos Touchdowns, and that's on IG as well. On Facebook, it's Tacos and Touchdown Live, and on YouTube as well. And we do the show usually Thursday, but sometimes we have a special guest. We may have one on Tuesday or Wednesday, but definitely appreciate you for having me on the show, bro.
Thanks, Aaron, man. You guys make sure to check him out. And I always feel like, everybody has a podcast, but you guys do a really good deep dive positionally, especially with the lens on the Cowboys. So check him out. You'll see all of his stuff in the description. Thank you again for tuning in for another episode of the Deep Cover Podcast. Again, we come at you once a week, every Thursday as well. So make sure to subscribe, like, all that good stuff. And Aaron, thanks again, and we will see you all next time.
Appreciate you.